The man took out a small knife and cut off all the sides of the plastic bucket. Then he scooped up a small amount of seawater and put it on a plastic film. Then he put a cup in it and put a heavy object in the middle of the plastic film. Very quickly, a device that evaporates seawater by sunlight was made. The man drank it impatiently. Although the amount of water was small, it was pitiful, but at least he was not thirsty to death. Because there was stable seawater in the vast sea, there was hope for survival. The problem of drowning was solved, but there was no food. Sooner or later, he would starve to death. At this time, the man thought of the about-to-sink yacht. There may be a lot of miscellaneous materials in it, so the man sneaked into the pool full of wet chicken water. But before the yacht sank, he had a hard time scraping cans from the cabinet. When all the materials on the upper floor were scraped, the man was worried that the materials were not enough, so he sneaked into the water and wanted to take more food from the cabinet below. He also picked up a signal transmitter. However, when he finally moved all the materials to the life raft, he not only did not feel relaxed, but even more panicked, because he found that after a long time of soaking, the signal transmitter had gone out of order. This meant that no one knew he was here. The possibility of rescue was even less likely. At this time, the man had been trapped in the sea for 6 days. Just because not long ago, the man woke up and found himself on a yacht worth 3 million yuan. He was swimming into the sea alone. He was a little confused and hurriedly climbed out of the cabin to check the situation. But he was stunned when he climbed halfway. There was a container that was more than 20 meters above the sea surface. He was stuck on his own boat. The man was very curious. Where did such a big container come from on the sea? He just ran into his own boat. He didn't have time to think. He saw that the boat had tilted. He was in a hurry to turn down and try to slow down the speed of the yacht. At the same time, prevent the boat from shaking, in order to prevent more seawater from getting into the cabin. Then he pulled out a deep steel tube. He inserted it into the gap between the container and the boat. He used his strength to try to tilt the container. However, he lowered the weight of the container. The steel tube had been bent and deformed. As a result, the container did not move at all. It didn't work. The man had to think of another way.
At this time, he suddenly saw a small hole in the corner of the container. He suddenly thought of a way, so he quickly walked into the shipwreck. He pulled out a heavy sandbag from the cabinet. Then he carefully jumped on the container, tied the rope of the sandbag through the small hole in the container. After making sure the rope is tight, the man picked up the sandbag and threw it directly into the sea. Soon, with the help of the current and gravity, the container was slightly loosened. The man quickly turned the boat in the opposite direction. Finally, the container was pulled out of the ship, but because the hole in the ship was too big, the seawater still flowed into the shipwreck. The water level was already over the knees. The man tried to start the water pump to drain the water. However, the motor only made a slight sound. There was no movement at all. The man had no choice but to take the risk and get on the boat. He turned the boat in the direction of the sea breeze, but one side of the gap was completely exposed to the water. He no longer poured water into the shipwreck. Looking at the container floating farther and farther, the man finally let go of his heart. Next, he just needed to fix the gap. Then he could continue to travel on the sea. Thinking of the man's stiff face here, he finally had a relaxed expression. After a simple repair, he took apart all the electronic products, put them on the deck and let them dry. Then he opened a bottle of 502 glue, poured it into the glue and stirred it evenly. Then he smeared it around the gap of the shipwreck. Then he sealed all the gaps with nylon wire material and pressed it tightly. After making sure that it would not flow into the sea again, the man took out a wooden stick, used a knife to cut a thin end, and poured water into the water pump to drain the water manually. After a busy day, the man was exhausted. But in order to survive, he didn't dare to stop. He immediately took off the battery under the deck and connected it to the drying radio. He wanted to call for help, but no matter how he turned the boat, the radio only made a slight sound. He couldn't send a distress signal at all. The man had no choice but to replenish his energy first. However, he had just taken out a board and a kitchen knife and was about to cook, but he found the deck that should not be sealed. It was raining. He felt that something was wrong. He rushed to check it out, but the scene in front of him shocked him. He only saw the calm sea. At this moment, there was no rain. The storm was about to come. The man hurried back to the shipwreck and found a raincoat on the boat. Then he climbed on the deck again and wanted to put it away to prevent the yacht from being blown away by the storm. Unexpectedly, a strong wind blew it away and blew the man directly into the sea. He struggled to stand up and wanted to try again, but the heartless sea wave hit him directly into the sea. The situation was very critical.
After a while, the man struggled to swim out of the sea. He climbed on the boat and hid in the shipwreck. He wanted to regain some energy. However, the heartless storm didn't give the man a chance to breathe. Soon, the ship began to shake violently. The man didn't have time to react and lost his balance. He hit the ship's pillar on his head and fainted on the spot. Not long after, the man woke up from a coma. He found despair. A big hole was made by the sea wave on the deck. The seawater was constantly flowing into the shipwreck. The whole yacht was about to be submerged. The man didn't have time to think. He climbed out of the shipwreck and hid in the lifeboat. He slept soundly. When he woke up again, the sea was still calm. The yacht was still floating on the sea. He let out a sigh. He thought that as long as the yacht was there, he could save himself a little bit. However, when the man finally moved all the materials he could use to the lifeboat, the yacht sank into the sea. He couldn't save himself at all. But even so, the man still didn't give up his hope of survival. In order to determine his location as soon as possible, the man took out the navigation map. According to the instructions, he marked the direction where he was. He tried to find a route closest to the international port. He hoped to meet the boat passing by. After determining the route, the man pulled on the lifeboat zipper. He was ready to sleep and rest. He waited for his energy to recover. However, the merciless fate came back to him again. At night, the storm came again. In the lifeboat, the man could clearly feel that the storm was more fierce than before. But the fragile lifeboat couldn't stand such a disaster. It started to sink after a while. Soon, the sea was full of lifeboats. Seeing that he was going to be drowned, the man firmly opened the zipper. He used all his strength to dive into the scary sea. Then he swam to the water desperately. He finally caught the lifeboat. This saved his life. The storm was still floating on the dark sea. The man could only hold his head and roll his body. He was suffering from the storm. His only wish now was to end the storm as soon as possible. Desperation and fear were like the deep ocean. It made him feel suffocated, and his heart beat fast. Soon, he couldn't stand it and passed out. At night, the man woke up in a daze. He was surprised that he was still alive. The lifeboat also floated into the international port. Soon, a huge cargo ship passed by him. So he came to celebrate. The Alliance took out the signal stick and aimed at the sky to launch. They hoped to attract the attention of the cargo ship.
However, after launching all the signal boats, they were waiting for him. There was no response at all. Seeing that the cargo ship was getting farther and farther, the man shrugged his shoulders. He stared at the front and prayed for a miracle. However, the cargo ship's right was getting farther and farther away from him. He was completely in despair. But the fear of death reminded him that he couldn't wait to die, because once he missed the cargo ship, he wouldn't be able to wait for the rescue. Even though the cargo ship had left, the man still didn't give up. So the man hoped in the lifeboat to continue looking for a way to attract the attention of the cargo ship. Soon, he found his favorite book in the box. He tore the book into pieces and threw it into the box. He lit a flash of light in the gloomy sea. He wanted to attract the attention of the cargo ship. But no matter how much the man burned the fire, the cargo ship didn't stop. It was still getting farther and farther away from him. Instead, it was a raging flame he couldn't control and poked it out of the box. He burned the lifeboat. Looking at the fire getting bigger and bigger, the man was a little confused. He was in a hurry to save the fire. But as soon as he slipped, he fell into the sea. A moment of cold seawater wrapped him up. It completely extinguished his last glimmer of hope for survival. Faced with repeated bad luck, the man gave up. Exhaustion and despair slowly pulled him into the sea. But suddenly, there was a lifeboat on the seabed. It seemed to be looking for him. However, the man was helpless. His body was slowly falling down. It was getting farther and farther away from the seabed. But when he saw the light of the lifeboat, his fire of survival was rekindled. He used all his strength to move towards the light. Finally, under the guidance of the sighting lamp, the man grabbed the lifeboat's hand and successfully rescued it.